Ever joined a company with hundreds of engineers and had no idea who owns what, where anything lives, or how to deploy? On day one, you're asking questions like, where's the documentation? Who owns this service? And how do I even get started? And instead of building, you're wasting 30 to 50% of your time digging through GitHub, Confluence, Jenkins, Slack, just trying to find answers. In this video, I'll show you how internal developer portals, and specifically Backstage, solve that chaos with service catalogs, ownership, docs, and self-service. Let's start building with Backstage. Welcome to the first episode of the Backstage YouTube series. In this episode, we're going to talk about why internal developer portals matter. The problem is basically think of yourself as being on day one at a company with 500 engineers, and you got to ask yourself these questions. Which services does your team own? Where's the documentation? Who owns the payment service? And what's the deployment process look like? Guess what? Developers spend 30 to 50% of time just finding that kind of information. Not to mention the daily tool chaos that you might have. So you might be using GitHub for code, Confluence for your documentation, Jenkins for CI, Grafana for monitoring, PagerDuty for incidents, and Slack for your tribal knowledge. So what do developer portals solve then? Well, at least 4 problems. The first one is what exists? And the solution is using a service catalog. The second is how do I start? And you can use self-service templates. Where are docs? And the solution for that is integrated documentation. And finally, who owns what? So who owns a specific API or a number of APIs? Instant discoverability helps with that. Not only that, but you can also link different APIs together and see what team owns what. Some real-world impact statistics for you. Spotify improved their onboarding by 2.5x. Netflix had 3x faster service discovery, and Shopify had 50% improvement in their productivity. So what is Backstage? It was open sourced by Spotify back in 2016. It is a developer portal. It is now a CNCF incubating project, and many companies have adopted it, over 1,000. And it is a framework that you can use to build the portal that you dream of however you want. It's very flexible. What are we going to demo? Well, at least 4 things. The first one is how to start Backstage locally. And then we're going to explore the software catalog, and then add services and teams. And finally, visualize relationships within Backstage. I will give you a sneak peek at the end of this video of what we're going to do in episode 2, so stick around. But for now, let's go ahead and start building. Just a quick plug before we continue. This video is part of my Backstage 101 course where we dig much deeper into the internals of Backstage and how to build a real internal developer portal. We cover the service catalog, software templates, TechDocs, auth, search, and even how to deploy it to production. The course includes over 35 hours of video and 11 hands-on labs. You also get a certificate and a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you're interested, check it out in the description below. All right, let's get back to our lesson. Let's jump into our course, our Backstage 101 course. And in here, you'll see our labs on the left-hand side. We are interested in the first 2 labs, the local Backstage setup and the basic software catalog. So I have these labs already started for us, so we can start right away. And let's see here, we have a few tasks for us. So we're going to look at our environment setup and prerequisites and a few others. So let's take it one at a time here. Step 1, we're going to verify our Node.js installation. Backstage heavily depends on Node. So here we go. And actually I need to update this. This is version 20 in here, but we actually moved to version 22. And then npm version, let's see what we got here. We got 10.9.2. npm install yarn. We should have yarn already installed. So let's check that. Yep, looks good. And verify that Git is installed. Here's our Git version. You can change this to your Git username that you're going to use as we push into GitHub and so on. You can change your email as well, or just leave it. That's fine. Then we need to create a directory where we're going to do the majority of our work and change to that directory. And that should be good to go for this task. And there we go. Task successful. Next task is to create our first Backstage app. Let's go ahead and begin this task. All right. Step one is to create the new Backstage app. So we got to go into our proper folder here. And let's run this command to create our first app here. And we'll call it Developer Portal. It's a Backstage app and it's using this particular version 0.7.7. This takes a few minutes. So we'll let it run here. All right, it completed successfully. Excellent. So we have Backstage deployed. Let's navigate to the project directory now. So if we clear here and run ls, you'll see that we have Developer Portal. He created that directory for us. So we can go in to Developer Portal. We can explore. Let's see if we have tree installed. So ls, la, we have all the files and folders that were created inside of our new application. You can see a bunch of files. One of the more important ones is the app config file. We'll see that in just a bit. You can also look at the code editor here and you can view all the different files inside the application for us. Again, the app config.yaml is a very important file. Step 4, we configure network access. By default, Backstage only listens on local hosts. To make it accessible remotely for us to be able to access it from the lab, we need to get our VM's IP address. So you can run this command here. This is the lab's IP address. It's a public IP. Now we can open code editor here and navigate to the app config like I mentioned. And then we can change the app base URL from local host, as you see here, to our IP, which is what I copied. And also the backend.base URL, this one, you need to change that as well. Uncomment set host here. So let's uncomment that and change this to 0.0.0.0 to listen on all interfaces, and then change the backend course origin from localhost to your IP. So backend, by the way, this is dot notation. So when you see backend and then dot base URL or dot listen, so we're looking at backend dot course, and this has to do with YAML. So this is a YAML file. So backend dot course dot origin is localhost. We need to change that also to our IP address. Okay, everything looks good. Let's go ahead and check what we did here. It looks like we did it successfully. So our next task is to first run an interface exploration. So we're going to look at the application, the Backstage application, explore some of the default interface and main features. So let's get that started. So step 1 is install dependencies. So first let's clear here and navigate to our folder. Run yarn install. This will install all the required dependencies for our Backstage application. After installation is done, we can upgrade the core packages to ensure compatibility with Node.js 22. So we can run that like this. Step 2, we create a systemd service. So remember, we need to run a Backstage. We have the application there, but it needs to run with a systemd service. So we're going to go in the terminal here as we see, and we're going to run this t command, which will generate a service for us. So you can see it has a description and a few other things like exec start. It will run yarn start to start our application. And then we can run these commands, systemctl commands, to run Backstage as a system service. And now we can verify that this is running. The status command, it's active, it's running, looks good to me. We can run the journal_ctl command to see our logs here. So it looks okay. Let's exit out of here. We can see our IP address and we can access this directly by opening a new browser window and navigating to the IP we have with port 3000. So let's try that. 3,000. There we go. Looks good. We've got our Backstage application running. Make it a little bigger for us. Very nice. All right, let's explore the navigation. So we can do a few things. We can click through and I'll show you some of the navigation items like the home page, the catalog, some software templates. I think we have one as a sample. TechDocs currently will be empty, and APIs. And then we'll look at the software catalog in just a second. So if we go over here, you can see once we hit the home button, you can look at different components. So by default, we have this component, which is this example website. You can see it doesn't have any tech docs or source code. It's just a simple example with some relationships, who owns what is owned by who, that kind of thing. Some APIs as well. So we can switch over to the APIs. We see an API example and who the owner is, owned by guest. The system is examples. Type is gRPC. And it's not production. That's why it says experimental. Once again, you can see the relationships and docs here. We won't have anything. This is our tech docs. If you go under create, this should show you the templates. So we have an example Node.js template. If you choose that, then however the template was created, you can start to fill in some steps in the form of a form. And then when you run it, it will run whatever the template is set to do. So very, very basic stuff here. We haven't really configured anything yet. We just got Backstage up and running. All right, some useful systemd commands. We already went through those. So let's go ahead and move on to the next task. Next task is a project structure tour. We're going to explore the Backstage project structure, understand how the applications are organized. So let's go ahead and take a look. So we can run our ls command here. And as we saw before, these are all the files we have. App config is a central config file. Under packages, it contains the application code, front end and back end. So if I go under packages, you can see I've got the app, front end, and the back end folders. We'll see this catalog info.yaml file as we build components and as we create templates, how we create those. And this is a component of itself, really. And then the package.json file is the Node.js dependencies and scripts, which we should see down here. All right, the monorepo architecture. So we saw the packages folder here where we have all our backend and front end. So it's a monolithic application. Backstage is a monolithic application with both the front end and back end together in the same repository. So you can see the app front end is a React application. And if you go in here, you'll see a lot more information. Here's the source code, and it uses a lot of TypeScript. And then the backend is built with Node.js. So to examine the front-end application, if we go into the app folder, you'll see under the source folder, we have app.tsx. This is the main React component that renders the entire portal. There are components in this folder, custom UI components for each specific need. And the app.test.tsx is used for automated testing. And that's the front end. From a backend perspective, we can go up one, go up another one, go into backend. And from here, you can see the source code. And we've got an index.ts file here. And we don't have pretty much anything yet from a plugins perspective or types.ts just yet. The core configuration files, again, is the app-config, which we'll spend a whole lot of time in this course. So you can see here how we've made some changes already to be able to view our application here in another browser window. Also examine the catalog metadata for the Backstage app itself. So we saw that as well. So we're good to go and move on to our next task. Understanding Backstage config. Let's see here. This is our last task. So step one, analyze the main configuration structure. We kind of went through this already, and we saw this main file. Understand the application metadata. If we want to dig deeper, we can go back. There we go. And app config. So app.title scaffold Backstage app, the title page, which will show up in the browser title at the top. Base URL, that's fine. This is how to access the Backstage itself. My company is what shows up here, my company or my company catalog. And that's the organization. And metadata shapes your portal's identity and branding. So of course you can change this depending on your organization. Examining the backend config. So base URL confirms the API endpoint right here. This is our backend, listens on port 7007. So the front end calls the backend on this port. And we're listening on all interfaces here. CSP and course define security policies that allow the front end to communicate safely with the back end. And the front end, as you can see, works or runs on port 3000. The database that we use is Better SQLite 3. This is all in memory. So this is all for development mostly. And we'll see later as we progress through the course that you'll see that we can deploy this as a Docker container in Docker Compose or in Kubernetes also as a Docker container. Supporting services, integrations, we have GitHub integration. You can see here out of the box, the token is empty, which is expected. Of course, you can add your own GitHub token. TechDocs is another integration we'll see later. Allows us to create or have generators in Docker and stores docs locally so you can preview these docs with your external services. And then we've got the providers, auth providers. This is where we're going to add the Keycloak integration and see how we can use that. The catalog config, we'll spend more time in the next lab for this one. And this is where we see a few things importing, the import setting controls, branch naming, Backstage integration. As you can see, expected file names is catalog info.yaml. The rules allow specific core entity types like component, system, API, resource, and location. And then location is very important. This is a list for all the local examples that the example files that Backstage is going to ingest, including entities, templates, and organization data. We'll see later that we're going to have, instead of local files, we're going to have target URLs in GitHub like this, which makes a lot more sense in production environment. You don't want to keep messing around with this app configuration file. You just want to point to an external repo. Step 6, confirm cluster and permission settings. So you get Kubernetes and permissions enabled is true. As you can see, this is for the Kubernetes integration. It's empty right now, but we will add it later when we configure Kubernetes integration. All right, so that's it for this lab. This is done, so we can complete this, return to our course. Next is our basic software catalog. So we can enter this lab and get started here. I sped up the process for us since this video is getting pretty long. So as you can see here, I have pressed the skip button into every one of our tasks. So the lab is pretty much done. To show you what we're supposed to do in this lab, and I'll explain a lot more and we'll dig into the actual UI in just a second. First off, we understand what Backstage entities are. Then we can create group entities, user entities, register people in the catalog. Then we look at component entities, API entities, and then we can test everything. That's what we're going to do right now. Just to show you what's been built, we created people and teams in here. So we created an engineering organization. Inside of it, we have 2 teams, platform team made up of Alice, Bob, and Emma, and front-end team made up of Carol, David, and Emma. So you can see Emma is part of both. That's fine. And then we've got some services and applications. There's some infrastructure services, as you can see here, front end and libraries. These are all services and applications available to us. And then we have APIs and interfaces, like the user auth API, customer data API, and so on. And some systems, they reference, but they're not yet created, and that's completely fine. So we have a few of these. So the way this works is you need to register all the entities in the catalog. So if we go to our code editor, and in the code editor, you can see the app config YAML once again. Under the catalog key here and under locations, You can see how we've referenced the teams, users, components, and APIs under catalog entities. So if we go into that folder and examine each one of them, you can see the users.yaml. And this is all YAML format. If you're familiar with Kubernetes, you're right at home. You can see the API version. The kind is user, some metadata. And you can see this is Alice Johnson. We're giving her a display name, an email, a picture, member of the platform team, and another user, Bob Williams. And you can see he's a member of the platform team as well. There's Carol. She's a member of the front end team, and David, Chen, and Emma. So all that is here. Under teams, this is another YAML manifest. So we've got the kind is group. This is the platform team. You can see type is team. The profile, the display name is platform team. There's a team email. There's a picture. And we can see also you can add some children here as an array. We got the front end team, and we've got the engineering org, as you can see, as a group. And it has children, which is the platform team and the front end team. And then we've got our components. So kind is component, and we have a type service, lifecycle is production, and the owner is the platform team, and the system is identity system. Another component here, this is the API gateway, the config service, the customer portal, and this one is of type website, the admin dashboard, and what else? We got the shared UI components, this one of type library, and we've got another library here. And I discuss what the differences of these entities are in here. As you go along through the lab, you'll understand the difference between a library and a website and so on. So I won't get into the details right here. The next one is the APIs. So kind is API. And here we can define different APIs. This is a REST API here. We call it the user auth API. So of type open API, lifecycle production, who's the owner, what team, what system. And you have the definition here. Here's the open API definition. As you can see, the different endpoints. Here's another API of type also open API, some endpoints as well. Here's a third one. This one is of type GraphQL, and you can see the definitions as well. All right, so that's how we define all of that. And then once you do that, you need to restart the Backstage service. So you can do that with systemctl restart Backstage. And then we can now explore all of that in the Backstage app. So if you go into our Backstage application here, let's make this a little bit smaller. And now you can see all the components here, the gateway, but we can filter, which is what I'm going to do right now. So let's open the filter here and start off with maybe users. So you can see all my users, Alice, Bob, Carol, David, and Emma. If you click on any one of these, you can see the ownership for this user. So this user, Alice, is part of the platform team. There's some direct relationships here. So the ownership, there's one service that they own, the user authentication service. You can see it's part of the identity system, and some description. The lifecycle is production, some tags, and all that again, they were defined in YAML. And look for groups. You can see we have multiple groups. We got a platform team, front-end team, engineering. You can see the type organization, type team, type team. If we pick on the platform team, for example, we can see that this is a group entity, and it has a parent, which is engineering. And here are the members of this group, Alice, Bob, and Emma. And some description for each one of them. And what ownership this team has. It owns this API, for example, user authentication API. And if we go back and take a look at, let's say, the API right here, I think we have more than one API. So let's go back to home. First, clear our filters here. There we go. So that gives us 3 APIs. There is the configuration management API, the customer data API, user authentication API, the owner for each one of those. You can see the Bob is the owner of this one, the front end team is the owner of this one, and the platform team is the owner of the user authentication API. And of course, if you click on any one of these, you'll have even more data on this, and you can see some graph here. The platform team is the owner of this user authentication API. And when we get to TechDocs, once again, you can open the documentation for this particular API. You can tie it to a source in GitHub. So all that is available to us. Okay, what else can we show here? Components. We didn't really dig into components as much. So if we go back, by the way, APIs has its own button here in the navigation menu. You can go straight to it. So if we go to home, and by default components is selected. So you can see all the different components that we have here and its type. So a service, a website, a library. If we pick on, let's say this one, you can see it's the relationships that this has. We can view it in a graph. So we can see the customer portal web application, front-end team owns it, and it depends on the API gateway service and the user authentication service, which is very helpful. Again, if somebody is joining your team, they can quickly jump into the catalog here and find what they need. So who owns what and the documentation for that particular service and so on. All right, what else can we show? We talked about people and team relationships. We talked about exploring the API, and searching as well is pretty neat. So you can go into search here and just clear that, type, let's say, authentication. And right away, you can see, did I type it correctly? The user authentication service, user authentication API comes up. So once again, you can go in here and see the API. You can search something like front end as well. It'll show you any that is tagged with front end. So the front end development team, Carol, David, Chen, the customer portal, web application, and so on. So the search mechanism is very convenient. Step 7 here is talking about identifying missing systems like this one. This entity has a relationship to other entities which can be found in the catalog. Entities not found are the system default identity system. That's completely fine. We just haven't included that. So what have we accomplished? Really, we've understood the organizational structure, how we can create teams and people. And in a later lab, we can see how we can tie those users and groups to Keycloak, your single sign-on, or to another organization through GitHub, for example, or through Active Directory. So that's all fine. Service architecture, talked about that. We talked about the API documentation. We talked about the ownership model and the dependency mapping and the discovery system through tags and searches. So hopefully this gives you a quick overview of the catalog, and as a whole, it shows you in this whole episode a quick introduction into Backstage. In the next episode, we're going to focus on golden path templates. This is really where the magic of self-service happens. So we're going to see things like creating production-ready projects in minutes, templates that encode best practices within, and then we'll see from form submission all the way to working code. We called it episode 2, where developers stop waiting and start shipping. And once again, if you want hands-on practice, check out the Backstage 101 course link in the description of this video. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in episode 2.